The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Tony D'Angelo's PM Coast to Coast. Now, here's your host, Tony D'Angelo.
And a very good afternoon to you, wherever you may be. As Vin Scully used to say on the Dodger games, I am indeed your host, Tony D'Angelo, here on the afternoon edition of Tony D'Angelo's PM Coast to Coast. I'll be joined in a moment by David Andelman. David is an international correspondent and journalist with a career as long as your arm. He is a frequent commentator on CNN. He was the editor of the World Policy Journal, one of my favorite books. He had written called A Shattered Peace, Versailles 1919 and the Price We Pay Today, is a wonderful book because it tells us all the problems we have in the world 100 years later really stem back to the Treaty of Versailles, but we have so much we have to discuss with David. We'll be talking about the Trump and the Iran nuclear deal. We'll be talking about the scandals, Rudy Giuliani, the White House Correspondents' Dinner, John McCain, you name it, we'll be talking about it, and I can't wait to get David on the air, so sit back, have some fun, fire up a color fina, as Tom Snyder used to say, and we're going to be coming back to you in a moment with David Andelman here on Tony D'Angelo's PM Coast to Coast. You don't want to miss this, folks. Breaking new ground today here on Comfortably Zoned Radio. We'll be right back. Thanks again, Dan Ingram. We are back, as the founder of the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, Ralph Tycho, likes to say, and I'm being joined here by David Andelman. David has a wonderful, wonderful resume, and he's terrific to talk to. He's been with me on a number of occasions, and I was reading his book this week, A Shattered Peace, Versailles 1919 and the Price We Pay Today. And first of all, David, and I recommend this book highly because this book will tell you all the problems that we have today stem from what happened 100 years ago in Versailles. But David, first of all, good afternoon. So nice to have you again, my friend.
It's great to be with you.
Thanks so much. And my first question to you is, when I looked at A Shattered Peace this week, and I looked at what our president did with respect to the nuclear deal, effectively disavowing the JCPOA. How much farther, in your estimation, did he pull us off of the track of Mideastern peace in doing what he did? And you can approach this any number of ways, but here I am. I'm trying to get my poor little head around it, and I just can't.
He pulled us off the track in about 6 different directions at the same time, if you can imagine that kind of a metaphor. Look, the first thing he did was he immediately set Israel and Iran in direct conflict. And so that happened just yesterday when the first missile exchanges that took place between Israeli forces and Iranians buried inside Syria. And that's not going to stop, because now basically what he's done is he's unleashed the hardliners in Iran to do whatever they want. When that treaty was fully enforced, it wasn't really a treaty; it was an agreement. It had been ratified by Congress and would have been much harder to get out of. One of the first mistakes of the people who actually drafted it. But at any rate, what happened was when Trump pulled us out of the agreement, he basically gave license to the hardliners to say, all right, all the restraints are off, the handcuffs are off, we can do whatever we want, and what we want to do is we want to challenge Israel, as well as forces in some of the other countries, and we want to expand our influence even more dramatically than we have in Syria, in Iraq, and elsewhere in the Middle East and North Africa. So that was the first big mistake. The second big mistake was basically now what's happened is the oil prices have gone sky high, right? And they're going to go higher.
I noticed.
Gone $70 a barrel. Some experts are saying we could easily go north of $80 a barrel. And what this means is it's going, first of all, it's going to affect us, our price of our gasoline at the pump as we head into the summer driving season where prices ordinarily go up to begin with. And second of all, it's going to put more long green in the pockets of Vladimir Putin and the Russians, because that's the backbone of their economy is oil and oil prices. And they've been having a terrible time getting oil prices high enough to really make their country profitable again. And that's what's going to happen now. So there are a whole host of issues, and you know, at the same time, of course, it'll allow basically Russia to run roughshod over, or even more roughshod over whatever forces they want to in the Middle East, and basically they become the top power in the Middle East now, rather than we have basically withdrawn from the region. And I must say, parenthetically, linked to that, of course, is the decision next week to open the American embassy in Jerusalem in a fabulous ceremony. And that, again, is sticking our thumb in the eyes of every Arab and Palestinian around. So it's all coming together in one, you know, hot mess of a stew.
Now, if I can go back about 10 days in what has been the blur in my life, probably since the end of March, I walked into the house. In the house, I've got a video monitor, courtesy of my wife who set it up. And I watched for 5 minutes as Prime Minister Netanyahu was presenting in Israel about, you know, these are the things that is going on or are going on in Iran. And, you know, this is why you cannot have a treaty with these people. And I watched and I watched and I watched and I thought, well, you know, at least to the uninitiated, it looks somewhat convincing. What was your take on that?
Well, first of all, it was ancient history. Most of that material was shot way before the treaty was ever in effect. Look, what we've had for the last couple of years since this treaty has been in effect, we have had a regime where we have been able to have inspectors in every major part of Iran to make sure that they don't start producing plutonium again, that the centrifuges aren't spinning somewhere. You can't have centrifuges going without someone being able to detect it from pretty far away. Centrifuges are, of course, what turned ordinary uranium into bomb grade or certainly reactor grade plutonium or uranium. So that's been. We have had international inspectors, International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors have been in there all the time, and they've been very efficient at this. And in addition to which, we know that the Iranians have exported out of the country, has been monitored, all of the plutonium that they had stockpiled there that they couldn't conceivably have turned into a bomb. So they don't even have, they have no method of actually manufacturing any more of it, and B, what they had of it, 95% of it is gone. So the idea that they are all of a sudden, they're secretly somehow, have some, rat's nest somewhere of people squirreled away in a mountain making atomic bombs or approaching that ability, it is nonsense. It's really completely nonsense. But by abrogating the treaty, all of a sudden, the Iranians have every reason to deny the inspectors the ability to go in. And I must say, what was quite extraordinary, it's really gone all but unnoticed, just on Friday afternoon, the head of the number 2 guy at the International Atomic Energy Commission, the guy who was in charge of the entire Iranian inspection contingent, he quit all of a sudden without giving any reason. So we don't know why he quit, but the timing is somewhat
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, there was one of the interviews on Bloomberg today. What part of the discussion in the interview was that can this treaty, can this agreement, if you will, ever get back online in your estimation? Can cooler heads prevail? Can everybody take a step back and say, hey, wait a minute, we've got to make this work, or are we on a path to where we don't want to be?
Right now, we seem to be on a path where we don't want to be. The Iranians have said they have no interest in negotiating this thing again, and I don't blame them. It was hard enough for them the first time around. Hard enough for them domestically in terms of the conflict between the moderates and the hardliners. The moderates, of course, won out and got the treaty through. The hardliners are sitting there, chewing the carpet, trying to hope and pray it'll fall apart. But also, there's really no reason for it to come back into existence. I mean, in theory, it is still in existence. And Rouhani, the president of Iran, has said that he respects it, and he hopes that all of the other signatories will. And the other signatories, especially our allies, the British, the French, and the Germans, as well as the Russians and the Chinese, have also signed it. They've all said that they're going to respect it. So, we're kind of left out there on, kind of way out in left field, probably out by the foul line, trying to figure out how to get back in the game, and we're not going to get back in the game. So, sorry. I see nothing more than simply another wedge driven between us and our principal allies in Europe.
Now, Macron in France and Trump, when they were together, it was this somewhat nice, occasionally touching presentation. Has there been any dialogue, to your knowledge, between them since Trump had made his decision?
Oh, yes. There have been several phone calls going back and forth. I'm on the White House pool reporting list, so I get all of the emails that the West Wing puts out. And whenever there's a conversation between, we think it's every time, but certainly most of the times there are conversations between Trump and some West Wing leader, they put out a note saying, for instance, this afternoon they put out one saying that Macron and Theresa May talked on the phone. It's been very, anodyne kind of stuff. You don't really get a sense from that whether they got into it in some fashion. That usually has to come out afterwards from some leak or from, some official of that foreign country telling some reporters, what really went on during the call. So we don't have that yet, but we do know that there have been calls between Trump and Macron and Theresa May. I don't recall whether there's been one with Merkel since the U.S. pulled out of the agreement, but there have been contacts back and forth, but no real progress at all.
And the one thing which I'd like for you to bring out is there are a lot of economics and a lot of economic arrangements that were tied to the JCPOA, and I mean, a dumb question, which I'm really good at asking, is tell us how these arrangements are in jeopardy, but probably a more intelligent one is tell us particularly the types of things that will be troubling economically to the world.
Well, first of all, we already talked about the price of oil going up.
Right.
A lot of other arrangements were going on there. A lot of other contracts have been signed. I mean, the Iranians signed a big contract with Boeing to buy passenger jets. That contract, all contracts with Americans, Trump has now said are done. They're finished. They're over. They're canceled. They're not going to happen. The question is going to become: is a company like Airbus, which is a European consortium, but which builds a bunch of good parts of its airplanes in, for instance, Alabama in this country, because they want to sell to American carriers, among other things, they now going to not be able to deliver it to Iran. I think the Trump administration is going to make every effort to do that. But, Merkel and Macron have said that they will help every European country, every company based in their country that wants to continue to do business with Iran to enable them to do that. Now, it's going to be more difficult to have companies or banks that are tied into the American or dollar banking
Sure.
But I suggested last November in a piece I did for CNN, I wrote a column now,
Right.
a regular column for CNN Opinion. I suggested the smart thing would be for the Iranians to simply, continue to respect the contract and simply to turn off all business with the Americans and turn it on with, their competitors in these European countries, and make the United States pay financially for any idiocies that they decide to commit diplomatically.
It's an interesting concept, which leads us to the whole discussion of tariffs. And when I was watching this, I thought to myself, is he grasping the enormity of what he's saying? And I'll tell you, that put an immediate chill on the financial markets, which he was given credit for pumping up. And I'm just thinking to myself, how do the tariffs play into the treaty? And this is a bollocks of gargantuan proportions, I would have to think.
Oh, it certainly is. It's huge, and as I said at the beginning, the biggest concern is that a huge wedge has now been driven between the U.S. and our principal allies. Remember, Trump has threatened tariffs on all kinds of European goods. They've been suspended for the moment, but those it's all still hanging out there as a potential.
Mm-hmm.
So if Trump does in fact effectively touch off a trade war with our European allies, that compounded with our pulling out of this agreement and our pulling out of the COP21 environmental agreement, which a lot of people seem to have forgotten about, but the Europeans certainly have not. We're basically going to be sitting in a corner with a dunce cap on, and the whole rest of the world is going to be dancing around out in the rest of the ballroom.
It's absolutely mind-boggling to me. In your estimation, in the Trump cabinet, in the inner circle, in the family we don't know about, are there any adults in the room?
It is hard to see. Look, I think Europeans are adults. They really are.
Why? Yeah, I meant the people closest to him.
Well, that's a whole other issue.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I was at a Council on Foreign Relations symposium today, and the person who was the moderator happens to be a young woman who is at the National Security Council and in the White House. A very smart and intelligent and really very savvy young woman. I was very impressed by her, I have to say.
Mm-hmm.
I think, within the staff levels, I think there are some very smart and intelligent people. I think Larry Kudlow, the newest Republican, is a very smart guy. He's a good guy. He's not, a hardcore economist or business person like Gary Cohen was, but he does have the president's ear, and he is sensible. He understands the danger of a tariff.
Always seemed that way, yeah.
So, I think there are some people there, but there aren't very many left. I'll have to tell you that.
It will keep you up at night if you think about it. That's for sure. At least me.
Oh, yeah.
When you get to the whole life of this particular president, we have Russia, we have the Independent Council, we have the scandals. Let's take the Independent Council. When, in your estimation, do you think we'll have a direction, and what way do you think that direction will lead, David?
Well, I'm not an expert on that. I know very little more than what I by listening all the time to the likes of CNN and MSNBC and even Fox and so on, and reading all the papers. But, my sense is he's going to have to wind it up fairly soon. The Justice Department does have this sort of standing, I don't even whether it's written or unwritten rule, that too close to any particular national election, you don't do anything to rock the boat or tilt it toward one party or another. So he's kind of running out of runway with the election coming up in November and all the primaries on now to come out with any kind of a major position or series of indictments or whatever right before the November elections. In
understand. Now, with the November elections upcoming, can we see I guess, a sea change in Congress to where Trump is then staring down the barrels of impeachment?
Well, I don't think anybody really wants to talk about impeachment, but I will tell you there are a couple of other interesting landmarks between now and then.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is NAFTA. There has to be some kind of an agreement on NAFTA coming along pretty soon. In fact, Paul Ryan just said today that if they don't have some agreement on NAFTA by May 17th, which is next Friday, they may not be able to get it through Congress in this session. And the Republicans would like very much to get some kind of a NAFTA agreement through Congress. So there really is a hard deadline at some point pretty soon on getting some kind of a NAFTA agreement. And if we don't get that, then things are really going to start falling apart. So there are a few things like that coming along that really do need some kind of a decision.
Attention.
That are going to affect the elections. There's no doubt. And as far as impeachment is concerned, I think Democrats would be very foolish to really raise that anyway. And I think they understand that because they don't want to impel a whole group of sort of conservative independents saying we don't like Trump very much. But the thought of removing a president from office, which has never been done in the United States.
That's correct.
Have been impeached. There have been other presidents who have been impeached. Bill Clinton was impeached by the House.
Yes, he was.
But there's been no president removed from office by the impeachment process. Richard Nixon resigned before it got to that point. So, I don't know. I think that would be very foolish to really raise the specter of impeachment at this point.
Well, I don't know quite how to approach this question, but maybe I could approach it from the two ways I was thinking of. Rudy Giuliani signs up to be Trump's counsel, gets in trouble with his law firm for making a couple of comments that perhaps he shouldn't have. And how that all plays into the Stormy Daniels scandal and Michael Cohen and things that Trump might have been involved with, and Michael Cohen's, shall we say, the sanctity of his office and attorney-client privilege being breached. I mean, the scandal value is enormous, but what here is the order of things, and what types of things should we be looking for?
Well, it's interesting. Trump, who's the Republican congressman from Pennsylvania, he did his final interview. He's quitting Congress. He's not standing for re-election, but he's actually resigning from Congress. Tomorrow is his last day. So we did sort of a farewell interview today on MTP Daily on MSNBC, and he said, and he went down a whole laundry list of things that if any one of which, if a congressional candidate had been involved in this, that political career would have been finished. Mexicans as rapists, and a Mexican judge that was judging him. Just a whole host of issues like that, down right to the president, with one of the president's top aides today saying that McCain is, he's dying, so why should we pay any attention to anything he says?
Right.
These things are just extraordinary, but that's what's going to happen. So, but this goes back to what Trump said during the campaign. I could walk onto the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot someone, and nobody would care. And so the anchor asked Charlie Dent, why does he think that's happening? And he says, I don't know. I just cannot fathom why people believe that. And that's the case, I think, right now, is how is this even possible? I don't know. That's the answer.
That's why I'm asking you, my friend. It's well beyond me. One thing I did want to discuss with you in our closing minutes together, because you do have friends that cover the president and the White House press corps. What is this whole thing about revoking the credentials of people? I walked into my office building in New Haven. There's a big monitor, and I just read the title of it, and I said, I just had this Orwellian sensation that I actually had to ask myself if I was really there. So I was wondering what you might have heard about that.
I'm sorry, you dropped out for a second there.
Oh, and I'm sorry. The whole situation regarding the revoking of press credentials.
Oh, yes. I mean, that's it's hard to see how that could ever possibly happen. First of all, it'd be a huge lawsuit by every news medium in the country, and it would go, if it ever got to the Supreme Court, I can't imagine it would ever get that far, but there's no way they can keep a president can barricade himself in the White House and not allow any, I mean, it's kind of like how Trump has joked, if I ever have to leave office, something like that, as though at the end of his 8 years, he'll decide, I'm president for life. I mean, that's just not going to happen. But the interesting thing is, let's imagine that happens. Who's going to go in? Is the Secret Service going to go in and drag him out of there? I mean, how does that work exactly? And will some of his NRA supporters, for instance, go in there with AK-47s to defend him? And will there be pitched battles to try to hold on to the White House? I mean, I don't know. It boggles the mind sometimes.
Yeah, it certainly boggles mine, that's for sure. Well, anyway, in our closing moments together, and of course, once again, you've been so gracious to come on. What might be your predictions? Not that I'm going to hold you to them. Not that anybody could really predict anything these days. Going in through the summer as to what we can see and what we should be looking at.
Well, we certainly should be looking at to see what the fallout is from the first of all from trade. And trade is very important. The most immediate thing, of course, is in June the summit between Trump and Kim. There's one thing we haven't talked about.
Let's do that. I mean, because that's a very important subject.
I don't know. I think what could very well happen is they arrange some kind of a great deal. Kim really is, counting on the fact there'll be a new president in there at some point, and then the deal will fall apart. And meanwhile, the sanctions will have to be in some fashion reimposed, and the cycle will repeat itself as it has for his father and grandfather. So I don't know. I just cannot be a guy who's gone this far to produce an actual working and deliverable nuclear arsenal, just all of a sudden just giving it up and say, here, take it. And meanwhile, part of the deal might very well be that our forces have withdrawn from the Korean Peninsula, which makes that whole area all that much more unstable. And South Korea at the mercy of a complete madman in Pyongyang. So it's just if we go around the world like that, there's just too many horrific things happening, poised on the edge of happening, that I can't even imagine. But I don't want to keep all of your listeners up at night, so let's just hope everything turns out for the best.
Well, we always do, and I always operate on the premise that forewarned is forearmed. The guest, our good friend David Andelman, a frequent contributor on CNN, the author of one of my favorite books, A Shattered Piece, Versailles, 1919, and the Price We Pay Today. David, update us on some of the other things you've been doing and where our friends and fans can reach you.
Well, you can always reach me through Twitter, at David Andelman, all one word, and it'll be great to be in touch with all of you. I'm hoping to get my Twitter numbers up, as it were. I've also just embarked on a new project. I'm going to be I am the visiting scholar at the Center on National Security at Fordham Law School, and in charge of something called the Red Line Project. And we are going to be examining the history and derivation of red lines, like in the Middle East and various other parts of the world, beginning with Munich back at the beginning of World War II, down to the present and beyond, and seeing just which ones worked, which ones did not, and how they've changed the strategic landscape. It's a very exciting project. We're just getting it underway. We're looking for funding and so on. So anybody out there who has any funding available, please get in touch.
Okay. This is broadcast far and wide, so you heard it here, folks. David, thanks so much. Thanks for being with us, and you have a terrific weekend, and we will continue to follow and be back in touch soon. Thanks, my friend.
Very kind, and thanks for having me. Take care.
Certainly. Special thanks to David Andelman, giving us the condition of the world. As Phil Rizzuto would say, holy cow. Stay tuned, folks. We'll be back to you real soon with a guest to be determined. And with that, have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. This is Tony D'Angelo signing off, and thanks for listening. And thanks to all the stations along the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. Take care, guys. God bless. Thanks again.